Welcome to The Conscious Cut. I'm your host, Hoi Ki Liu. This podcast is all about rethinking sustainability across fashion, lifestyle, and everyday practices. Through conversations with entrepreneurs, policymakers, educators, and changemakers in Hong Kong and beyond, we'll explore real solutions, from industry-wide policies to the small habits we can all adopt. Let's cut through the noise and create meaningful change together. Welcome to Conscious Cuts. Today we're joined with Dr. Christina Dean, who's a true change maker in the sustainable fashion industry. She's the founder and board chair of Redress, a pioneering NGO dedicated to reducing textile waste and driving circular fashion solutions. With over 18 years of experience, Christina has been in the forefront of reshaping the industry. Through initiatives like the Redress Design Award, thought leadership in global media, and her award-winning documentary series, Frontline Fashion. I'm so excited to have you with us here today, Christina. Let's dive in. So the first question I have for you, and the first topic I want to talk about is actually, before all of this, I want to know how you got into this industry. Because you told me 18 years ago, you weren't in fashion at all.
Exactly. Well, it's a very good question with an odd answer, because actually my training is that I studied dentistry and I actually was a practicing dentist, and I really hated the job. But I'm kind of quite a passionate person, and in hating a job, it just didn't feel right. So I retrained as a journalist, and then I moved to Hong Kong about 20 years ago, and I wrote about environmental pollution and about public health and about industrialization in China. And I was specifically drawn to, interested, intrigued, worried by the textile industry's environmental impact, which is so vast, as we know. And just at that point, like 20 years ago, exports from China were really increasing as the whole sort of global fashion market changed. And so it was because I was a very, very nerdy journalist that I got into the textile industry, into its impact on the environment, and with that on public health. And then I found out that nobody, or very few, I couldn't really find many advocates who were championing the cause for redress. That I started Redress, because there was no one out there.
I think especially if you're talking about like 18, almost 20 years ago, which is when I got in the industry too, that was almost when fast fashion was just, really picking up. And no one was talking about the problems at all. Everyone's just talking about the profits. Yeah. The profits that this business is going to bring. And that was so exciting that no one looked at the responsibilities behind it all. So I think it's so great that it's something that, to be honest, I think even though I've been in the industry for 20 years, it really only hit me about a decade ago. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously I've been doing this for a long time, but you might want to sort of cancel this conversation, because I still find it incredibly confusing and complex. Even though I breathe it and I talk it and I think about it and I do it all day, I don't actually have all the answers, so I'm really sorry to say that, because it's such a complex industry, full stop. Sustainability within the fashion industry, unbelievably complicated, and the world economy is so complicated. So, nothing is easy when it comes to fashion and sustainability.
Yeah, because I think it's now a lot more in the limelight now than it was before, but still, with something like before COVID, it was on full force. Everybody needed to move in a more sustainable way. But the moment COVID hit and all these bankruptcies happened, all these brands start pulling back their budgets. And the first thing they cut is sustainability. Yeah. It's not marketing. Let me touch a little bit more on how Redress is helping, though. I know nobody has all the perfect answers right now, and this is why we're constantly carrying out these discussions. Discussions to try to bridge the industry, different players in the industry together, because the fashion industry, when we always talk about we want it to be circular, there's so many parts of it, and not a single part is circular, actually. We're working on a very flat line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so to bring it into circularity, we really need to bridge all the parts together for everybody to understand each other, for that to become possible. So with that said, I would like to actually understand more of what Redress is doing, because I know you guys have so many different parts. You guys have the annual design awards, which is very focused on sustainability. You're working with the big giants of the manufacturing world already. So that is a great bridge for designers to actually get in there and understand what's happening. Because without that understanding, you can't design in a sustainable way when you don't know what's being done in the manufacturing end. With frontline fashion is great. Like I said, I think everybody needs to watch the show because especially everybody says that has no access to factories and manufacturers. They don't know how it's being done. Well, actually, watching frontline fashion, they will learn a lot about how things are being done. So, that's one of the ways to get into the factories, even though you're not there. So tell me, what else am I missing? What else are you guys doing?
Well, first, I'm going to tell you Redress's mission. It can sound very dry, but I'm going to say what Redress's mission is. So we're in a Hong Kong-based, Asia-focused, environmental nonprofit working to accelerate the transition to a circular economy by educating designers and consumers. So, you addressed it. The linear system is kind of what's got us into so many problems where we take, we make, we use, and we dispose. And the majority of the fashion industry is on a linear model. And it's kind of like it's the hangover of like the early industrial boom that we created such a stupid system which we extract from the earth. And in clothing, we make something and then we wear it for literally 5 minutes and it's out. So to your point, what Redress is trying to do is to create a circular economy so that the resources that we take from the earth are kept in use. And where ideally, nothing goes to waste in landfill or incineration. So what gets me very agitated is the data. I'm going to come back to your question. Forgive me, I'm going
no
like
worries.
This
It happens all the time.
The industry, I love it and I hate it, right? But the data from the industry is absolutely useless. Okay, as we know, transparency, no one knows what to record, how to record it. The data can't be compared. You can't compare a data point A with a data point B because that's an apple and that's a pear. So the point is that the data is rubbish. So when I say that between 100 billion and 150 billion new garments are produced every year, you can see that's a big variation. I don't know the truth. But the point is that the majority of those clothes will end up in landfill or incineration within a short, maybe a year from production. No one really knows. Okay, so that's the linear system. So we're up against a beast here because what we're trying to do with many other advocates for sustainable and circular fashion is to make it circular. Okay, so the global economy, from furniture to auto to food to fashion, the global total economy is about 7.2% circular. So that means as a whole world, with all our clever brains, we've only managed to go 7.2% of our economy is circular. In the fashion industry, it's less than 1%. What does that mean? So less than 1% of the materials that go into the fashion industry in clothes come back as clothes. Okay, that's because we're burning them and chucking them in the landfill. So, tiny non-profit, Redress. We've got the heart of, Goldman Sachs. We've got the heart and the ambition of, a huge government. But really what we do, and it sounds quite basic, but within the enormity of the fashion industry, we've found 2 target audiences who we are educating and inspiring to make change. Now, the 2 target audiences are designers and consumers. And you might think, oh, well, what about industry? Well, the problem is we have to pick where we can actually influence. So if we look at designers, the reason that we educate designers through multiple programs is because supposedly, whether it's true or not, 80% of the environmental impact of a product is actually laid out at the design stage. So the designer and the design team is coming up with the product, the materials, the fit, the cut, the repairability, the supply chain, etc. So everything's locked in at the design stage. Your top, this table, the impact, it's in the design stage. It's actually quite obvious.
Right.
So we educate designers about circular fashion, basically. And then why consumers? Well, why consumers? Because obviously the consumer has a lot of power because ultimately we are buying it. And, what fascinates me about the fashion industry is like the fashion and footwear industry is about 2.4 trillion USD annual revenue. And if you put it into that that revenue into a GDP, I think it's between the third, fourth, and fifth biggest economy. Like the fashion industry is massive, all right? So these consumers, we're spending a fortune on trying to elevate ourselves, not just clothe ourselves. We're elevating ourselves. You want to be this today, you want to be that tomorrow. So we try to inspire consumers about their. Now you can sound like a real nerd. You've got to be really careful with this, but we want to inspire them around their responsibility, their power, their influence, actually, to make the fashion industry more positive. The problem that we have, honestly, is that trying to get through to a consumer's mind and then their heart, and then it's very, very difficult when what they want is now, cheap. And I want more of it. I want more, and I want more, and then I'll have more, and I'll have it cheaper, please. Now, I'm not poo-pooing consumers for that, but I'm just saying it's a very tough market to work within.
Yeah. And it's also difficult. I mean, I'll give the consumers this credit. When you turn on social media, 99 out of 100 posts you see is going to be pushing you to buy something. All the sponsor, the NGOs only have so much budget to push the advertising, right? So the more you follow these NGOs and these causes, the more it will show up. But if it wasn't in your habit to begin with, it's never going to show up in your algorithm. So, I mean, I think it's so important that these are the two target groups that you are focusing on. Consumer, absolutely, because I don't think they realize, with all the people saying, oh, I can't afford more for better quality. It's not telling you to pay more overall. I'm telling you to use the same budget, but buy less, buy better. And it makes all the difference, if you're buying something that will last you 5 years, 500 wears, whereas something that will fall apart with 5 washes.
And that's, I don't know how old you are, and I'm not going to ask a lady, but basically most younger generations to us, younger people than us, have been, like we said with fast fashion, you started your career just at this, when fast fashion was kicking off. And so you've got basically most of the world has only grown up with fast fashion. And the prices of fast fashion. And what I think is very revealing. So number one, I hate to say to people, you must spend more on your clothes, because no one wants that. But the evidence shows us that over the last X being 80 years, and I'm talking about a typical US average annual household expenditure. So this is the US data. Over the last 80 odd years, let's just say, the average household expenditure on clothes has gone from 15% to about 3%. That's an old stat, right? It's really dusty in my brain today. It's roughly like that. The point that we're making, or I'm making with that, is that we're spending less and less of our average household expenditure. And of course, we're buying more and more and more. So this is exactly your point. It is actually true that people could spend more and buy less.
Exactly.
I mean, it's definitely...
People don't seem to realize it, but I always tell them, actually, if you look at just the markets in the last 20 or so years, when you look at inflation in different industries, it's not that fashion hasn't increased in price, but overall what we wear on the daily has not increased in price. Luxuries has increased massively, but actually your daily pieces has decreased in price.
And that's because of the cost of labor.
But it's not that like the cost of labor is going down. It's also not that productivity is going up, but it's these giants are pushing the suppliers further down and cutting corners where we can't afford to cut corners. That's why in the past people would say things like, oh, I'll have this sweater that's 20-year-old, and or outerwear, a piece of jacket or a coat that, 20, 30 years old, maybe it's passed down by a grandparent and it's in still such good shape. The stitches are still intact. It still looks good. It hasn't lost the structure. It's actually all down to workmanship. Did you take 2 days to make that jacket or did you take 5 days, And there's steps that you cannot cut out in the production line. But if you're, with the arrival of all these fast fashion, they cut out all the middle steps where you really bring out quality. So I think it's hard for people to realize that when you're not in the market. Technically,
most people probably can't tell quality if...
No.
I've got to tell you about this, by the way. So I'm divorced. This is my ex-husband's jacket when he was a teenager, but he doesn't know that I've still got it. So I hope he doesn't see this, because I rather like it. It's probably 30 years old, but anyway, I'll probably have to give it back.
Actually, I have, that's funny because now that you say that, this sweater I'm wearing actually have little holes in it, but it's so cozy. Yeah. It's like my favorite sweater. I just keep, and I guess because I know how to do it, so I've been stitching it up in ways that people can't really tell. But also my jacket and my purse today, sure, if you have. This is from my aunt, an aunt of mine. And so this jacket might be as old as me. And it's a leather suede jacket. But it's got such beautiful quality workmanship. Soft. Yeah, that, why would anyone throw it away? Yeah.
And also, then, talking about purchasing online is that, you will know this better than me, but the fact that most people are buying, 34% of purchases are done online, is that right?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. A huge amount now.
So you're never ever going to look, touch, feel, look at the stitching, and also the design can be simplified because people are buying from the front.
And
the back is very simple. Yeah. So
another point, now that you brought up online shopping, is something that I've spoken to my friends about, and people never seem to realize this, but because exactly of what you said, when you're buying things online, it's so easy because half the time it's impulse buy. It's something, it's ads that's being fed to you. So you want to look at it. And when you look at it, you end up buying it because I actually really want something like this at this moment. But especially if it's a new brand, you don't really know what you're getting. And often you look at the comments to see how things are being sized. But if you don't know the brand, for example, I might be buying a pair of shoes. Normally I'll be a size 37, but occasionally 36 and a half, sometimes 37 and a half. So what do? Most consumers actually will buy the size above and below and their own size. So every item that you think you want, you're going to get 3 of delivered to you.
Well, a lot of the big brands are stopping free returns.
Okay, that is so good.
Because it's eating their margin.
Yes, and I think consumers don't realize that. Like, they think they're doing fine because, it's just like bringing the fitting room back to your own home and whatever I don't want, I return. You don't feel bad about it as a consumer, and why should you, right? And this is where I think, this is absolutely right, consumers shouldn't feel bad because they don't know, but this is where I have to bring up the awareness. Is actually most places do not restock your items when you return. Restocking fee is too high. It's going to be more than what they're going to get in their margins and profit. So most of those things end up being binned. And this is why when we say, I forgot the exact number, but the amount of produce, there's like a great percentage that goes straight to waste. And this is the kind of things.
Again, data is rubbish in the fashion industry, but essentially no one knows the truth. But essentially, if we say, a lot of commentators say that 30% of production won't get sold. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be landfilled or incinerated. So it's, you never really quite know.
You never really quite know. That's the thing. I mean, one of the ways that I've changed my factory, I've told you recently I've downsized my factory, and we're jumping all over the place. We jumped down to the manufacturing part. But I've told you recently I downsized my factory, and that's actually because one of my clients has been highlighting to me. Before COVID, my minimums used to be 300 units. Post COVID is now that I've downsized my factory, is now 50 units minimum. As long as I can negotiate better terms with other suppliers on your fabrics, on your trims, we can make it happen. And the reason I really push for this difference is because when they were ordering 300 from me, the customer would tell me, like, I only have orders from the different wholesalers, including our own shops, for 260 units. So at least 40 units is going directly to waste. They're not going to destroy their brand name by selling it to an outlet right away. I mean, an outlet actually usually have outlet lines. So it has nothing to do with the actual branding. So, and just learning that really, like, it kind of killed me a little inside, I was like, we spent like more than a year putting this stuff together for you. And it costs less for you to buy 300 pieces and to throw away 40 instantly than to buy the amount you need.
That you actually needed.
Exactly, So, I don't know, just hearing that like way too many times is, which actually brings us to one of our other topics, is the greenwashing. I feel like this is part of it, right? Like, we're always making new policies and things to make sure brands and companies are complying and doing things responsibly. But a lot of times it's just different ways around it.
You see, I don't know. I'm going to disagree a bit because I think it depends what sort of company you're talking about. So we'll get to greenwashing, but for me, what's really interesting is that 97% of the fashion industry's revenue globally comes from the top 20 groups and brands and brands. So, I mean, that's the winner takes all. Those top 20 companies, which are basically luxury, sport, and fast, they own the fashion industry in terms of total revenue. So some of those are listed, and they're obviously well governed because these are really top global businesses. And I personally don't think that they greenwash. I know it's really contentious. I know there might be many companies that do greenwash that don't have good governance and don't have good legal. And I don't know if compliance would come into it, but okay. So that's why I'm going to say I don't really.
I do agree with you. I don't think it's not like they come out with the intention of greenwashing. It's more like, occasionally they're so big, you have to look at things in a really massive sense. And I think it's different when you're working with a giant and an SME.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. So the big beasts that own the fashion industry, I think there's so much risk for them to greenwash. Okay, so that's one thing I would say. And then I would say completely the opposite problem that we've got is that companies do much more. I'm talking about the big kind of the best ones. They do so much more than they're able to talk about or willing to talk about. And the reason for that is because they either can't prove it or the risk of being called out for greenwashing, especially in consideration of the fact that there's more anti-greenwashing laws and regulations coming in, has meant that those companies who do great stuff actually don't talk about it.
Right.
And that's like, I mean, people call it green hushing. It's a word that was brought up. It was kind of invented, I don't know, about 15 years ago. I might be wrong on that. But really, so many people are anti-greenwashing for obvious reasons, which we should be.
Yes.
And I want to say something else on that in a minute. But green hushing is something I feel really negatively about because it means that we're not telling the customers and the consumers about the good stuff that we're doing.
So I do have brands like that too because it's already written in the company policy. Like when I source fabrics for them, I don't even need to look at anything like virgin polyester. If I'm giving them anything synthetic, it must be recycled. But it's not marketed. Yeah.
It's a pity that. And I think also this comes back to my point about the data in the fashion industry being so useless, is that, if a company says this is better than that, well, they better have a lot of evidence we want things to be really, really, really clear, and consumers deserve things to be really, really clear, but it's not always easy to prove that. And that's where that leads to just silence, because you need to have a big legal budget to be able to defend yourself if you're going to go out with a big claim to say that this is better. Well, prove it.
Right.
Yeah, so I think where I'm tired is I'm just tired of everyone complaining all the time when there are so many great things actually happening in the industry.
That's true. Yeah. That is very true too.
And also some people are just anti-corporates, anti-capitalism. So whatever you say, they will find fault because there is fault in capitalism. But
it's hard also when the thing is when you're so big, not everyone in the entity is going to have the same voice. So sometimes it also depends on who's louder, occasionally, like we're the sustainable, most of these companies will have their sustainability department. And everyone in that department is crazy passionate about what they're doing. It comes down to occasionally where, a crisis like COVID hits and we're on the brink of bankruptcy. So finance is going to come into play now. What's more important at this moment. So I feel like it's like what you said, because sometimes if they promise something, they can not necessarily come back from it either. So they're very careful. This is also not something that we had planned to talk about, but it just occurred to me. I saw briefly in a heading of a headline the other day that how France was talking about having a fast fashion levy, and it's past what their government policies. I don't know how their houses work. It's past something. It's supposed to go into vote, but then it's been pulled off. So it's not being talked about anymore. And I feel like that's part of it's not so much greenwashing at this moment. It's just more what I was saying. It's like when the economy is not good, these things get pulled out first. And
I can't speak specifically to what happened in the last few weeks about the French fast fashion issues, plural. But I suppose it's competing interests, isn't it? Because we do have, the fashion industry has done a lot of good, which is that it's given a lot of development opportunities to many countries in emerging markets. So, it's a driver for economic growth, and that's absolutely fantastic, and we can't take that away. So it's just that there's a price to pay for economic development, which gives people jobs, versus the other price that we pay, which is the pollution that comes with it. And so that's why I suppose that coming back to like sustainability in the fashion industry is so complicated, because do you want to trade off one for the other? And so in relation to the fast fashion in France, I mean, again, I can't speak for it with enough intelligence to define it, but there's a conflict, there's a tension between economic growth and environmental protection.
Because I mean, the whole world's been talking about how fast fashion needs to stop, but we don't, like, there's actually data for us to see. There is their profits and their growth in their sales. It's growing massively.
But I would say, I mean, fast fashion is entrenched in our global economy. And I also believe that fashion consumer, I hate calling them consumers, but we'll call them fashion consumers, if they do buy fast fashion, how do you define it? They can take good care of it. Actually, not all fast fashion falls apart. It's not true. It really is not true. And so I feel like we need to give people the choice to buy more like inexpensive clothing, and I think that's fantastic. And I think that really, if you buy clothes from fast fashion businesses, let's just say, you just take really good care of it. It should last you, actually, and it's not fair just to assume that all fast fashion is actually bad. So it depends on the person who's going to take care of it or not.
So it also is great on that's why it's so good that the consumer needs to be educated, because so much is on the consumer's mindset, if you care to take care of a piece or not, it makes all the difference in the longevity of a garment.
So I'll tell you about this funny project in a nutshell. So I did this project called the 365 Challenge, where every day for a whole year, I only wore other people's clothing cast off. So I would go to different recycling centres. So it's all post-consumer clothes, like raw from the clothing banks. And so, you'd open up bags and it was basically full of complete and utter rubbish, or you'd find designer bags in there, whatever. So I wore a different outfit every day for a year. And the reason that I did it was because I wanted to understand what do people chuck away and why? Like, can I wear it and find out? So the long story cut short is, through this extremely entertaining different outfit a day, all from cast off clothing. It was kind of this seed for a book that we wrote called Dress with Sense. It's called The Conscious Guide to The Practical Guide to a Conscious Closet. And it is a book, it's out everywhere, in multiple languages, but it takes a typical consumer, what is a typical consumer, but it takes a typical sort of fashion-loving consumer through quite a basic guide of how to buy, wear, care, and dispose, not a good word, of your clothing. And the reason that we wrote it, as I said, is because I spent a whole year wearing other people's discarded clothes. And actually, do you know what? I looked better in other people's discarded clothes than I did in my own wardrobe.
I think that's the thing. You never know what's going to surprise you in there. One man's trash is literally everybody else's treasure, right? Oh, okay. Let's go back into Asia. Why did Redress, and why did you pick Asia as the spot for you to start and to grow and to expand? I mean, obviously, Asia is a major manufacturing hub. It's also where a lot of consumers are spending, especially in Hong Kong. But what else? What is what is the draw and the drive for you to be here?
Well, you just answered the question. But there's the truthful answer, and then there's the strategic answer. So the truthful answer is just I moved here, and then when I was a journalist, I just happened to live here, and then I travelled a lot in China, and I cycled across China actually. I'm really into long distance cycling.
Okay,
and so it was very fortuitous that I happened to live here. So that's like the truthful, practical answer.
Right.
But the strategic, clever answer is actually that, Hong Kong's positioning and sort of it fascinates me that you can go to the airport and within 5 hours, your flight, no matter where you go, you're within half of the global population. So in Hong Kong, we are in the bubbling hot pot of the fashion industry. And that means we've got the production, we've got the consumption, and we've got the waste, we've got the water pollution, and we've got carbon. That we all share carbon, obviously. So for that reason, I mean, Asia's huge, Asia's complicated. Even being Asia focused is way too complicated for us.
Yeah.
Because country X, Y, and Z all have different legal systems. And so we're never going to achieve everything in Asia. And I'll definitely go to my deathbed, and we won't even scratch China because China is so vast. So, but the reason that we're Asia focused, even though we know it's a bit of a challenging, huge market, is because it's such a dynamic part of the world for the fashion industry in terms of its history in the fashion industry, textile, garment, and then its fast-growing, emerging consumer markets. Yeah, and also, I think what really interests me is, obviously we've seen for such a long time, wrongly so, that Asia has just been like this factory for the world. And obviously we now, thankfully, know that that's not the case. We've got this big domestic market everywhere, particularly China, obviously. And so that means that, Asia's making for Asia, China's making for China. And I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. I actually have opened that up to a lot of my international customers, especially with all the, the trade wars and the policies that's happening, and I said, to be truly sustainable, it does make sense to localize everything. Actually, there's nothing wrong with that, but how do we actually get to that localization where it's like a franchise where, you know what you're getting from McDonald's when you go to McDonald's, even though it's in different locations made differently, right? So I've given them the option now to, I'll produce for your Asia, what you need in Asia, and then if I do the developments and the patterns and the samples for you, I'll sell that to you at a separate cost, so you can get that produced locally. I can also get a package together for you to have the fabrics you need, the trims you need, so you can get that done there, and it also will help that local economy. So I think, it is very disruptive to the industry, but if we can slowly start to adopt these changes, it will really help. And actually, I want to say all of this does stem from the consumer. Because even though it is government policies, you do hear a lot of consumers saying, they want to protect their culture, they want to protect their jobs, their localization of things. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm going to tell you straight, I'm so fed up with consumers. I'm fed up with the hope. Maybe tomorrow my hope will be back. Why I say all that, because for the beginning 10 years, let's just say, when I've been on this, vote with your dollar, pass the people, consumers, we can do it,
But
and
we're fickle.
It's just like, it's never ending. The problem is, honestly, we don't have time. Of course, we've got to educate consumers, but we don't really have time to sit down and explain to everyone whilst, the world's on fire and we're still trying to teach people. So that's where policy obviously comes in massively. And it's going to come in. It is. The Business of Fashion cites that there are 35 pieces of sustainability-linked legislation due to come in force in the next couple of years.
That's really exciting.
And that's across multiple parts of sustainability, what that means. Right. And so I think if you think back to 2005, was it 2005 when the WTO opened the exports from China? That's pretty much around that time.
Something, I can't remember, but it was around, I think it was that year.
Summer,
and they dropped the quota system and things like that.
So suddenly, bang, we can...
Actually, it's the year after I started.
So around that time. So if we look at that, it's taken 20 years... And I'm not just talking about removing of the WTO. I'm talking about it's taken the world, let's just say, the whole world, 20 years to wake up to the fact that fast fashion, and I'm not going to just paint fast fashion, fashion.
Industry and all.
Exactly. And so now legislation, of course, it takes a long time for legislation to catch up.
Yeah.
But legislation is catching up, and it's on the heels now of the fashion industry. And I think everybody starts to understand that. However, despite the fact that it's written about and spoken about, from my understanding, and I'm not an expert on sort of manufacturing side, But I don't think that the manufacturers are yet too worried about upcoming legislation.
I don't think so. No. Not at all. Yeah. Even when I speak to them about the DPP that everybody's talking about, they're like, oh, okay, so the legislation, we're in talks of it now. It's going to start coming in 3 years, maybe 4 years. And then they're going to give you 3-4 years buffer time. So we'll deal with it. We've got like 8 years, maybe 10 years. It's going to, if the economy doesn't get any better, they're going to push it back. So I feel like this is how the manufacturing end of the industry feels. And, to be honest, in the industry, a lot of people who still in manufacturing, they are maybe in their 60s or so.
Yeah.
So they're just looking at like, well, I'll be
on the
done.
beach. I reckon But actually, I wanted to talk something else, because something else really insightful happened, at least I read about it a year ago or so. So in the EU, 70% of the textiles and apparel that's imported into the EU comes from APAC.
Yeah.
And the EU does have some of the toughest, most comprehensive legislation coming into place.
Yes.
So I read a really interesting analyst report that is saying that investors need to urgently upskill the APAC supply chain in order to future-proof EU legislation.
I think so, yeah.
That it's a business risk.
Yeah.
So it's out there in data in terms of financial analyst reports. We have to upskill Asian designers, manufacturers, to be able to import, right? Or export to EU. But from my understanding, it's just like, it's on paper right now, but it's not actually in practice.
I don't think it's in any practice, And where you're tired of consumers, actually being in manufacturing, I'm tired of manufacturers.
We're just tired.
But I mean, I see people shifting things like, if they're large enough, they'll be like, oh, can you? And actually, even my customers ask me, like, can you shift our production to Vietnam, to Cambodia, to Myanmar, And because I work in such a mid to luxe market, and I always tell my consumers, like, don't come to me if you're looking for the cheapest manufacturer, because I'm not playing in that price war, right? And I know what I'm good at. I'm not just going to give you something as quick as possible so we can make the largest profit. So, when you come to me, my skills take time. So
but that's, I think I'm really interested in that the sort of, if I use the word power balance, I don't know the better word for power, but thank goodness manufacturers have come up
starting to
be equal partners. But actually, I'm not going to say
I still don't think they're equal. We're still very far from equal. But I think the fact that nowadays there's less manufacturers that's willing to undercut you the moment they know your price. It's already, like when I go to these our gatherings, for the industry gatherings, we all say like we shouldn't do that. And I agree, in Hong Kong, most of us aren't doing that. It might be some other factories that want to go direct, that want to take shortcuts, that's doing that. But there is definitely less and less of that nowadays. And with COVID, I think so many of us were burned so hard during COVID that now manufacturers are starting to demand a deposit and things like that. So, and on my end, because I've actually dropped my minimums, and it's hard to find a factory that's willing to cater to small units. But then I tell my customers, like, we have what we stand for also, which in sustainability is a huge thing for our factory and our company that I'm not going to, compromise on. So if you're going to ask me to order you, when you want me to make your production, and you want everything packed in a poly bag, I can only get you, the least I can do is a recycled polyester bag. It's got the recycle 4 or 5, And if you're willing to just match me on the little bit, I won't even take all your money for it, but just a little bit more, I'll get you a biodegradable bag, And I think that's going to up your story too. When you're getting I feel like when you're coming to me to get an elevated product, you should actually go for an elevated product and show that to your customers too.
I think you've got all the solutions. I think you should.
I really don't think so. Jobs? Like whenever I talk to the industry about these things, they think I'm absolutely insane. People look at me and they say, like, you downsize your factory. Like, what's that? Nobody wants to downsize. And like, actually, I'm working in my family business. So this was my father's factory that he opened. It took him a little bit to accept that, but I'm very lucky. I have a very supportive family that they can see the trend of the future. They're willing to listen to these talks that I give. So they get it a little bit better. And, my dad's solution to it is, well, I'll just step away so I don't have to watch all of it, go down.
Well, I'd like to ask you about revenue, but maybe we'll do that offline.
Yeah, definitely a hard question to answer at this moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, I think it's important for, us to be disruptive and to just show the industry it's not always about making the profits right now. The profits can also always come later, but you need to build that foundation for that future. If there's no future there, we're just talking about what you're making this year or next year. And
But that's the benefit of a family business, though. It's proven that there's more sort of future proofing, future planning, because you're not having obviously transient CEOs coming in for 5 minutes.
Yes. That's expecting, results and profits for the shareholders and all. Yeah. Okay, I'd like to finalize this podcast today with you, this interview with you, by asking you a few final thoughts. Really just to share with the audience, what are some practices that you think anybody can do and that you practice, that's sustainable practice that, maybe if we know about it, we can consider picking it up?
Particularly with fashion and clothing?
And no, anything lifestyle-wise.
I have a sort of slight mental problem, which is that every time I put something in the bin, I feel bad. That's not a nice thing. So I suppose the answer to that question is just to be so aware that, when I put something in the bin, it actually hasn't gone away. It's just going somewhere else.
Yes.
And I think for me, it makes me, and I'm terrible, honestly. I'm absolutely useless. But that one act, I feel bad every time I chuck something away because it's just going somewhere else. And I think that's a big thing to wake up to, because once you start waking up to that, you just see waste everywhere, and it's a bit of a curse. That's the thing. That's why I wouldn't wish my brain on anyone. And I'm very happy, but it comes with a slight burden, that awareness. Yeah.
But I think it's important because everyone does think that. They think when you think that you're throwing something away, that it's just poof, it's away, it's gone now, but it's not. It's just at somebody else's doorstep, really.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose that's the one thing. And on the positive side, I suppose the older I get, and I'm not very good at doing it, and it sounds very like sort of woke, or to say sort of self-care. It's something that we all need to do. I definitely don't do it, which is why I'm saying that in itself is unsustainable for me. So I suppose the weller we are, and the better that we will work with our colleagues, make better decisions. And I suppose ultimately you could say that, sustainability is about sort of taking good care of one another and self-love and care. And I mean, I know that sounds really big, but I do think it's really quite true.
It is very important. I think if you don't even care about yourself, how can I ask you to care about the earth, right? Yeah. So it does have to stem for yourself. You have to care about the place you're in and what you're surrounding yourself with.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for those tips. And I'd love to have you back, because I'm sure we will have more to discuss soon with all the things that Redress has to have. That's going to be happening with Redress this year.
Well, I've been around 20 years, so I'm here.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, okay.